This was most definitely a jam-packed and information-heavy chapter of One Piece, and after so many action-oriented ones, this is a change of pace I can really appreciate. First and foremost, with the cover page of this chapter, we would have Germa 66 in the midst of their escape from Whole Cake Island, encountering the mad scientist Caesar the Clown. Now, this is very fascinating to me. Remember the fact that their leader and father Judge is also a rather infamous scientist and inventor that shares a mutual former colleague with Caesar, the likes of the ever-renowned premier scientist for the world government, Dr. Vegapunk. Having these two men of especially questionable moralities and ethics potentially join forces could be absolutely major. And although these two have been antagonists at some point over the course of the series, it is undeniable that they have also served as allies to the Straw Hats as well. And with the establishment of the new third great power to replace the warlord system, that will be led by the work of Dr. Vegapunk, we could here be seeing the beginning of the Counter Forces creation. Vegapunk as of late seems to have heavily leaned into cybernetics and the like on account of his pacifista machinations. Meanwhile, Judge and Caesar seem to be a bit more invested in the exploitation of the lineage factor. Whatever the case, this is most definitely an interesting inclusion. But as for the chapter proper, we would open up to the 5 elders and Mary Joyce. And it was at this time that they would receive confirmation that Nika has finally emerged, the likes of which they had apparently been dreading forever. Furthermore, 2 emperors have fallen. Big Mom and Kaido have been overtaken by the new generation. This news was far too monumental. They could not possibly cover this up as the whole world would grab hold of this news. This timing was horrible for them. So horrible in fact that they didn't know of any simple way to deal with all this. From there, we would have the other end of the call the 5 elders were on as their contact was on a ship sailing the seas around Wano. Here, the elders would ask for confirmation that the elephant Zunisha was in fact gone, which they would confirm that yes, the elephant had wandered into the mist. The sword-wielding elder would then be made certain that the borders of Wano would be remaining closed for the time being, which is to say that Wano at this point remains nearly impenetrable. Here, they couldn't help but recognize the brilliance of the country's leadership to have shifted their plans on account of this current situation. The world government was in a precarious situation as even with their overwhelming numbers, a direct invasion would be nigh impossible. But at the very least, they would question if they could still have Nico Robin brought to them, which the CP0 agent would shakily confirm to be the case. However, something interesting would occur. The transponder snail would begin to go haywire. Someone was hijacking their signal, from which point an unknown voice would tell them to listen well, and that they should remain where they are as this person was on their way. But back to Wano, we've been reminded that after 20 long years of tyrannical occupation, the news of the Kozuki clan's return and triumph brought joy to the citizens. However, from the interior of Onigashima, we would have 2 members of the worst generation, Hawkins and ex-Drake, having a conversation. Hawkins was struggling to maintain his balance as he'd questioned the fact that Drake had been a member of the Marines all along, a question which Drake would not reply to. From there, Hawkins would merely drop to the ground as Drake would point out how bad the man looked to be at this point, which made Drake question the validity of Hawkins' cards as he was under the impression that they ensured his safety so long as he stuck close to Kaido. To this, Hawkins would retort that he bent the knee to Kaido only because he wholeheartedly knew that to do otherwise would be the acceptance of death. However, Kid, being the sort of man that he is, would fight till the bitter end along with his crew. Ultimately, they were different as Kid and his men were prepared to die, whereas Hawkins was not. And although Hawkins may have surrendered, he wasn't without his pride, and so even if he did foresee Kid's victory, it wasn't like he was going to go crawling back to him. Drake would then recall his prior conversation with Hawkins. Here, he warned the man that if he intended to switch sides, that this was the time to do it, then inquiring as to what his cards were telling him. Hawkins would reply by saying that he was divining tomorrow's survival chances for a certain man, then expressing that it was such a pity for it only to be 1%. And as it turns out, the man Hawkins was referring to at the time was himself, as we would see him fall, and presumably, Hawkins of the worst generation is now dead. Damn. Can't say I'll really miss him or anything, but hey, I'll take anything that amplifies the headline of these Wano events. From there, an entire week would elapse. The new Shogun Momonosuke had decreed that another festival would soon be underway, and as such, the decorations from the Fire Festival were here to remain. From there, we would have some funny looking kids at school. Previously, these kids were being instructed by the likes of Sarahebi, an underling of Black Maria, and as such, she wouldn't be resuming her educational duties for obvious reasons. But because of this, these children would need to restart their history lesson on the country's heroes from scratch, which they of course were not very happy to have be the case, although their very first lesson will be the story of the current shogun's late father, Kozuki Oden. We will then have some civilians discussing the fact that the most beautiful woman in Wano, Komurasaki, was in fact the daughter of Oden, along with the fact that the Kappa Kawamatsu had saved her from the castle as it was engulfed in flames, what they would admire to be an incredible display of loyalty. What is certainly a wonderful shift from the discrimination he once faced on account of his appearance. And as they spoke of how Denjiro, another scabbard, had been watching over things all along, we would have folks from Ebisu Town enjoying clean water to their heart's content. From there, we'd head on over to Paradise Farm, where the people had plenty of food to consume. It would be wondered if anyone knows anything about the man who had taken down Kaido, and interestingly enough, it would be responded that it was a warrior known as JOYBOY. Now that is very, very interesting. The name and or title of JOYBOY has begun to spread. Luffy and JOYBOY have already begun to be publicly perceived as one and the same, and that is most definitely major. I am very excited for what this means for the near future. It would then be expressed that JOYBOY is no longer in the country. So from their perspective, the Liberator is presently on the move, which may be able to provide a bit of hope to others in this world, just as the Warrior of Liberation was once so well known for doing. Although at this point, I don't imagine we'll be engaging in any more One Piece arcs of a similar country-saving format. They would have loved to have seen the man in person, however, as his heroism was said to rival even the legendary god of the Blade, which is to say that Luffy has become a modern legend comparable to the greatest legend in the history of the country. Wow, that is some very high praise. I'm curious if the notion of JOYBOY having left will be maintained or not, because as we later see, Luffy certainly has not left the country just yet. But from there, we'd find ourselves in Ringo at the Eternal Graves. Here, another shrine was to be built. Ginmon would express to Kawamatsu that from this very hill, their dead would be able to overlook the flower capital just like the god of the blade, Ryuma. This is where they would finally lay their late Lord Oden to rest. Here he'd be surrounded by his allies, beginning with Yasuie and all the other daimyo who fought for their country, ending with the recent losses in the form of Ashura and Izo. So yeah, the former Whitebeard pirates continue to take L's even now. Kawamatsu would soon begin some cheerful banter with Onimaru, wondering if they too would someday be honored there as well. Very happy to see the creature alive and well. Kinemon would confirm Marco's comfortability with Izo's placement, which he was, as he felt it was only appropriate to have his comrade's final resting place to be his home country. Again, another family member has left him for the afterlife, a feeling which Kawamatsu, Kinemon, and the other scabbards could all relate to as those who remain. Kinemon then expressed that if anything were to happen to any more of their heroes, he doesn't imagine he'll be able to bear it, and as such, they would pray for everyone's good health. From there, we'd have Yamato feeling the pain of hunger, only to insistently refuse said feelings outright. From which point, Hiyori would cry out to her brother Momonosuke as she had some major news to share. She felt Yamato would also be happy to hear the news, and here she refers to Yamato with the semi-formal male honorific. But anyways, Hiyori was very much being her true self as she kicked into her brother to deliver the news that Luffy and Zoro had finally woken up. Luffy wanted meat, and Zoro wanted booze. They'd rush into the room happy to see the two. However, Momonosuke would be quick to tell Luffy and Zoro to save room for later, that he had been waiting for the two to wake up so that he could summon the entire country for a massive banquet, as is to be expected at the end of a One Piece arc. However, Luffy with Yamato happily hugging him, and Zoro with Chopper crying on his head, weren't too keen on this stranger telling them what to do. They just proceed to indulge as Momonosuke would realize that they didn't recognize him at all. The two were shocked but would take notice of Momonosuke's seemingly tough build, interested in even fighting the guy. This would then prompt Momonosuke to go back to his old ways of leaping onto Nami's chest for safety, but this time around she'd give him a really mean punch to the face, yelling for him to get off of her. Momonosuke would point out that he is still 8 years old, which Nami would now recall. Meanwhile, Luffy and Zoro were now both thoroughly convinced that Momonosuke was definitely way tougher, which is very interesting. He is certainly no Oden, that's for sure, but that constitution of his is still a great perk to have. All the while, Brook and Sanji, being the old pervs of the crew, would sinisterly welcome Momo to adulthood, as he wouldn't be receiving any more special privileges. Yamato would then begin to laugh, placing a plate on Momonosuke's head to make him look like Oden, saying that he's still a kid on the inside, but on the outside, he's basically Oden now, much to Momonosuke's dismay. Yamato then expressed that Momonosuke should thank his parents for giving him such a strong body, confident that one day he would be the #1 samurai in the country, as Momonosuke would vow to give it his all. Again, not Oden level, but he's definitely got a shot, and I would love to see him later on in the series wielding a blade, and doing so very well. Nami would then urge Yamato to join her for a bath before the festival, presuming Yamato's vigil to have concluded. Luffy would question what a vigil was, which would prompt the ever-informed Jinbei to explain that a vigil is a custom of Wano where someone gives something up until their prayers are answered by the gods. And Yamato, whose face was stuffed at this point, swore not to eat or bathe until both Luffy and Zoro had recovered, a gesture which Luffy was seriously delighted by, and furthermore credited to how great he was feeling now, as Jinbei would take note of how good of a person Yamato really is. Zoro would then express his surprise that they weren't dirty themselves. Hiyori, happily over his shoulder, would explain that it was because she was in charge of wiping their bodies clean, wondering if it pleases him, as she was very playful in saying this. Sanji was infuriated by this, but hey man, Sanji got a girl last arc, Zoro got a girl this arc. But here, Zoro would recall the words Sanji had expressed to him before about cutting him down if he was no longer himself after the conflict. Zoro would then conclude that he must have returned from hell solely to fulfill his promise to kill Sanji, which was completely unnecessary at this point, but the two would clash. Yamato would then express that the castle does not have mixed baths, so it would not work out. Much to Nami's confusion, however, Kiku would offer to join her instead. And so in the men's bath, we would actually have Yamato, much to the delight of Brook and Sanji especially, as Yamato did not mind in the slightest, while Momo could not believe his eyes. Meanwhile, in the women's bath, they would hear how rowdy it was in the men's bath, as Tama would hope to be as beautiful as Nami and the others one day. Kiku would express that she used to bathe with Odin and the others before, but it would be far too embarrassing to join men she wasn't used to. Hiyori would then comment on the fact that Kiku looked exactly like how she did in the past, along with the fact that at this point she was now older than her even. Also, Speed is sticking around, which is really nice. But with that, word of the night's festivities would spread to every region, and you'll notice that not all of our Straw Hats have been present thus far. This is for good reason, as at Tokage Port in Udon, Usopp, Frankie, and some others had been working hard to get all three ships in great sailing condition. Even General Frankie was in great condition again, which was really cool to just about every onlooker. However, Kid, as he chowed down, would urge his men not to get too buddy-buddy with them on account of the fact that they could not afford to let their guards down until they were safely back at sea. He wasn't so sure how the information would leak from such an isolated country, but ultimately, once news spread of what had transpired, with the Emperors gone, they would have some major targets on their backs. A sentiment which Law would agree with, as being in Wano alone didn't necessarily mean that the world would not be able to find out. But it does mean they have no way to monitor what the response will be, which would only spur the crews on to friendly banter even more so, as they'd all wonder if their captain's bounties would be risen to some unimaginably large amount. As just then, Apo, in the hands of one of the numbers, would confirm their belief that the information had leaked, all while wondering how such a thing could have happened. As we expected, he is the one who let the news out. With this, Apo had the paper that contained all the bounties they were so curious about. He would drop it at Kid's feet and furthermore state that not only did this paper have their updated bounties, but also the names of those who had been newly dubbed Emperors of the Sea. Good lord, it looks like Kid and Law are now Yonkos. This is absolutely unreal, and you already know the next chapter is going to be insanely hype, as bounty chapters always are. Now, as stated before, not all of our crewmates have been together in this chapter, but to take things even further, Robin has been completely absent from this chapter. And recall that in this chapter, the Gorosei were confirming as to whether or not they would be able to capture Robin or not still, which the CP0 agents still believe to be the case. Now, considering Frankie and Usopp were off doing what they do best, fixing up the ships, I can only imagine that Robin was also doing something that only she can properly do. And that would be in regards to the poneglyphs, specifically dealing with the royal poneglyph that we can presume Kaido had. And if they are confident in their ability to capture Robin even now, then that should definitely be enough to tell you that the world government is not done with Wano just yet. And on that note, to further the hype even more, we would have a mysterious figure flying through the sky as he spoke to Akainu. Akainu would demand his exact position as the man was approaching Wano. Here, the fleet admiral would command him not to do anything unnecessary, revealing this to in fact be the mysterious new Admiral Ryokugyu. We'll then see it is a flower propeller on his back that is keeping him aloft as he would sigh and comply. Very, very interesting stuff, and I will say that it is dangerous to have such a character here right now. Not because he is an admiral, but because of the fact that he has flight at his disposal. The fact that he's going to be able to get an aerial view of Wano is dangerous because there is a possibility that, unbeknownst to everyone, Wano's borders are currently open. And currently open on account of Luffy's final attack on Kaido. However, it is surprising that they wouldn't be able to surmise or realize as much despite the passage of 7 whole days. We've got one more chapter before Oda's month-long break, and he is sure to make it incredible. There is going to be a whole lot in this chapter, so definitely look out for that. But as always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.